Hello, I'm Chuck Wooden. I'm joined by my co-host, Monique Melanson-Hunter, and you're watching The Veterans Corner.
Thank you, Chuck. If you haven't seen the Veterans Corner before, it's a show that's dedicated to our veterans, their families, and all those who support our veteran community.
Our topic today, we have a special guest, Aaron Elson. Did I say that right, Aaron?
Yes, you did.
Yeah, Aaron's an author. I didn't get a chance to read too much of the website, but you've written a lot of books.
I'm an oral historian,
Okay.
mostly of World War II veterans.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, welcome to the Veterans Corner.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. It really
Excellent.
is. This is actually history for the Veterans Corner. This is 108 shows, and this is the first time we've had an author.
Go on.
No,
Really?
so it's great to have you here.
But there's so many of the veterans I've interviewed could write a book by
Oh, yeah.
themselves.
Yes.
And many have.
Yeah.
And there's so many books of military history.
Yeah.
That's a little surprising, but
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm not the last author you'll have.
Well, you know what? Because of what you just said and the fact that you're here now, you won't be. I guarantee you that. And I'm sure we will have you back in the future.
Well, if I might just interject, it's the individual memoirs that so many veterans, World War II, Korea, Afghanistan, Vietnam, have written that give the details of what, war is like.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's on behalf of the Veterans Corner, the viewers, we want to thank you very much for what you do for our veterans. And the bringing the history alive.
All I do, though, is record their stories.
Yeah.
So it's not necessary to thank me that much.
Yeah. Well, it's believe it or not, it is. It is because those stories need to live on.
They do.
It's important. It's imperative that those stories live on. They've been through an awful lot. So it needs
They
to
certainly
continue.
have.
So we have a lot of information to cover.
Okay.
You want to start, Monique?
So when did you first start starting to preserve these stories, and what got you started?
My father was in World War II. He was in a tank battalion, and he passed away in 1980. That's, 39 years ago?
Yes.
And before he died, I bought a little tape recorder. I was going to record his stories. He was in the hospital. And I went to visit him, and I forgot the tape recorder. And I thought, I'll do it next time. 2 weeks later, there would never be another next time. So, I put it aside. I forgot about it. 7 years later, 1987, I found a newsletter addressed to my dad from the 712th Tank Battalion Association. I thought, wow, I'll write to the newsletter, see if anybody remembers my dad. Maybe I can find something out. I got a letter back saying, I didn't know your father. He was in my company. We're having a reunion. Come to the reunion. We'll walk around. We'll see who we can find. And so I went. And I found 3 veterans who remembered my dad. And all the stories he told when I was a kid that I'd forgotten, all but a couple details, came back to life. And I was just blown away. At the same time, now this is 1987, 32 years ago. At the same time, I would be in the hospitality room, in the parking lot, and somebody would start telling a story, and it would be 5 minutes before they get into the car because you had to finish the story. These were such compelling stories, not all about blood and guts or all about combat or war, but they were just such moving stories, emotional. I thought, and I also realized that the stories they told among themselves, they often did not share with their families. My father's stories were mostly humorous. He, the first time he was in a battle, he had been training for 4 years. He wanted to see what was going on, so he stuck his head up. A bullet or a piece of shrapnel went through his helmet, and the tissue paper inside, stopped it. So he wasn't that seriously injured. But these stories that they often, the more more poignant stories. Often they didn't tell to their families, and I thought they need to be preserved. Not only were they historical, but they were entertaining. You know, you put a bunch of veterans together, and it's like, can you top this sometimes?
Yeah.
So they had to be, they had to become good storytellers, but only among themselves. And I was lucky in that they accepted me. Most of them didn't know my father, but because I was there and I showed an interest, they were like a big family, and they welcomed me into their family. And most of them opened up and would go into great detail on some things. But that's how I got started.
Yeah, it's I was going to ask you the next question. I was going to ask you, why did you begin producing the audio books? But I think you pretty much
yes,
you pretty much covered that.
yeah, I was about to get to that.
Yeah.
But I went to that first reunion. I missed the next one, which I could kick myself for because it was the dedication of their monument at the Patton Museum in Fort Knox, Kentucky. But I went back in 1989 with that little Sony recording Walkman, a little tape recorder, and I never missed another reunion. And I just began, grabbing a guy by the arm and saying, would you tell me that story I heard in the hospitality rooms? So I would get the full story. And then I began visiting them at their homes. I would meet them in restaurants and record the story with plates clinking and people ordering coffee. And, one thing led to another. And over the years, I've accumulated an archive of almost 700 hours of interviews that I've done.
Wow.
And when they would have these reunions, they called them mini reunions. When they began to retire, they had a formal reunion in the Midwest because they were from all over the country, so they tried to find a central location. Then every January, because a lot of them were retiring and going down to Florida, they'd have a mini reunion. And I would drive, I was living in New Jersey at the time, I would drive down to Florida and back, and I'd take a box of 10 cassettes of interviews that I had done, and I would listen to them. And I forgot that. I didn't remember this part, And it was like hearing the stories all over again. And I thought, these would make really good books on tape. That's how long ago it was. And then along came the writable CD, and I began experimenting with, transferring, digitizing the analog tapes and editing them and putting them on audio CD. And so that's what I've been doing in addition to writing books.
Wow.
That's all you've been doing?
Well, I have a job on the side.
You do? He's written a lot of books, Chuck. I can tell you. I Googled him before the show.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So why do you feel these stories are so important from all these veterans and servicemen that you've been interviewing?
They're more important now than ever, I think, because the stories, not only the ones that I've preserved, but the Veterans History Archive, Rutgers University, Central Connecticut State University has a fantastic oral history archive of veterans. It's the stories that present the individual person's, the ground eye or the airborne eye view of war that really bring home what it's like. Just thinking about this today, I thought about a movie from 1930, All Quiet on the Western Front. It's a classic, and there's a scene in it which, boom, it's right there on YouTube, 3 copies, where this young German soldier in World War I goes off to the front, and he goes literally through hell, and he gets a leave after a couple of years of war, and he comes home and he goes and visits his old school. And the middle-aged professor is there, and a class full of wide-eyed kids, and the professor is like building up the war. Oh, it's your patriotic duty to go and fight for your country, for the fatherland. And Paul, the soldier, walks in. He's in uniform, and the professor says, "Come, tell them what it's like. Tell them what it's like to be a hero for the fatherland." And he says, "No, I can't do that." And the teacher, he goads him on, and finally he starts to talk, and he tells him that it's not such a great thing to get killed for your country, And the kids all start calling him a coward. It just, you don't want, that's why the troops to schools that I saw you interviewing before, that's why it's so important to have veterans, teaching and talking in schools, because, kids are impressionable.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's why these things are important.
Yeah, it's very important. We noticed that you publish your own work. Why do you do that?
I do that because I made a decision in 1994. I thought, I'm going to these reunions, I'm recording these stories. I thought, wow, these would make a great book. So I put together a bunch of their stories in their words in a book. I called it Tanks for the Memories. This is it here. This is the second edition.
Zoom in on that.
It took eight years to sell out. But anyway, as to why I published my own book, I sent it around. I figured, wow, these are such great stories. It'll be easy to find an agent, to find a publisher. Boy, was I naive. So I sent it around. I had some connections. A cousin of mine, was a well-known author. He sent me his two people I could contact, and one of them was retiring, and the other one wasn't interested. Anyway, I sent the manuscript to a well-known author of World War II books just for advice, and he sent it back, and he said, "These are the kind of stories that authors like me steal from." Now, he was being honest. He wasn't saying, "I'm going to steal your work," but what he meant was it's source material. And so, I finally made a decision. Am I going to, spend the next 5 years trying to find a publisher, which I probably would have eventually, or wallpapering my bathroom with rejection slips like you read about, except most agents don't even bother to send rejection slips. And so I called a printer, and I said, "Do you print books?" And he said, I'm very busy. I won't have time to read it. I can print it, but I just don't have the time. I said, I don't need you to read it. I'll read it, if you can print it. And we wound up doing about half a dozen books together. He said it would take, if I brought him, now this is 1994, it's a long time ago. He said if I brought him camera-ready copy, it was photo offset, it would save me a lot of money. And so a friend of mine had one of these newfangled laser printers. So she said, "You can use my printer." So I did all the editing and laid out the photos. And I'm an old newspaper person, so I knew layout and such. So it turned out, the printer said, if I bring him camera-ready copy in 6 weeks, we can have a book. And wow, it took about 6 months and about 10 trips up and down the New Jersey Turnpike, but it wasn't his fault. The laser printer had a defective heating element which burns the toner onto the page, and so letters were flaking off so that a C and O would look like a C. And so I just had to keep redoing it. Anyway, when the book finally came out, 2,000 copies, because in order to make it cost effective on a per copy basis, you had to have a lot of copies made. It's not like today where you can do something print on demand. So when it was finally ready, I went down and I met the truck at the station, and I picked up 2 boxes of books so I could finally hold it and look at it. You know, it was really like having a baby. That's as close as I've come.
It's a major accomplishment right there.
Well, yes, it was.
A lot of hours of interviews and
Well, yes and no. You know, I have a Facebook friend who spent the last 10 years writing a book. You know, again, it had to do with his father's service, and he tracked down like everybody in the unit, and he put it all together into a huge book. But it was like a tremendous amount of work he put into it.
yeah, I mean, and just the stories themselves. I mean,
Well, the stories themselves, yes.
need to be preserved.
Right. So, Aaron, how would our viewers find out more about you and more about your books?
Well, I recently started a podcast. Everybody's doing
I love that.
podcasts. I'm a little late to the dance, so to speak. But now, because my father was a tanker, and my first book was about his tank battalion, and a lot of my audio books are about tankers, I called it, now General Patton, who these fellows served under, General Patton's autobiography was called War as I Knew It. So I called my podcast War as My Father's Tank Battalion Knew It. And if you want to find it in the podcast universe, just plain My Father's Tank Battalion, all one word, no punctuation.
Yeah.
My Father's Tank Battalion, you Google it, you can add my name, but that will bring you to it. It's not yet, this is how new it is. It takes 2 weeks to get up on Apple Podcasts, and it's not up yet, but it is on the host, the podcast host. And you can also find if you look up my name, I have an author website, Aaron Elson. One word, aaronelson.com. Very simple.
Yep.
And so there you will find a lot of excerpts from the books that I've done and audio excerpts. The audio, I mean, I've written books. This book was once called Must Reading for Every Tanker. I mean, this guy, that was his first review in Armor magazine. Anyway, the audio is really what makes what I do special, I think, because there's no substitute. I mean, books are great, but to hear the veteran talking and telling stories, it really, they laugh when you think they should be crying. They get choked up when that's something that seems humorous. They sometimes the crying and the laughter are seconds apart in the same story.
Yeah.
It just, and then they recreate sound effects, you know, like one fellow describing a column of tanks and a shell comes in and he went, pa-boom, you know. And they recreate dialogue with the, with the emphasis. It really is something.
You know, Aaron, we are actually, I thought we were down to about a minute. We got 3 minutes left.
Oh, okay.
Just to reiterate what Aaron said was, if you go to Aaron Elson, AARONELSON, and that's how you'll find that information that Aaron was talking about.
And Aaron, I could tell you that the podcasts are actually very popular. I listen to a lot of podcasts, so I think some of our veterans and some of our veterans' families might tune in to listen to that. On your podcast, do you have some of those those audio stories?
Yes, the podcast is made for what I've got on tape because I can use a clip from the audio and talk about it a little. And my first episode is all humorous stuff. And what I did was I took a picture of a tank and a bunch of guys on top of the tank, and on the barrel, like in the movie Fury, they wrote the name of the tank on the side of the gun barrel. I wrote, "A Barrel of Laughs."
I look forward to listening to it, Aaron.
If somebody wanted to purchase your book,
They're at Amazon and eBay. And the audio books are on eBay. If you if you go to eBay and type in my name, I have an eBay store. I can't quite tell you how to get there.
yeah,
But you can find them on
you can
eBay.
certainly find a book on
Yes.
Amazon.
I can tell you that I Googled you, Aaron, before the show.
I'm all over the
Yeah,
internet.
and just by searching on your name, you can find a lot of information about you. So that's a good place for them to
That
start.
has to do with my methodology, which I had no idea. I didn't even know what a methodology was when I started. But I took typing in middle school, what then it was called junior high school. And when I typed up transcripts, I would put my name, then the veteran's name, then my name, then the veteran's name. And so my name, appears like 80 times in a transcript of an interview. And I put the transcript on my first website, which was called tankbooks.com. It's still up. But anyway, I put the transcript up and a lot of transcripts. And so if you Google my name, I had no idea what SEO, search engine optimization, was at the time, but I was doing it right at the time.
I hate to cut you off because we've got about a minute left.
Okay.
Other than purchasing of the books, is there any way the viewers other ways for the viewers to support you?
You can subscribe to the podcast.
Yep.
You can look me up on Facebook. You can friend me on Facebook. And I have a Facebook page, Oral History Audiobooks. One word, Oral History Audiobooks, where I put up information about the audiobooks. And the way to support me is to order an audiobook. That's how I wanted to do this. I figured this would be self-supporting.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, it was great to have
you
you.
so
It
much,
really was.
Aaron.
25 minutes goes by fast, and because this was the first time we've had an author, you will definitely be back here again.
Anytime,
and,
yes.
We'll have to look up for some more. Excuse me, still battling a cold here. A special thanks goes out to Pamela Quintal-Shea for supplying us, donating the POW MIA flag behind me, and Monique, and for Jordan up at Flagman of America on Route 44 in Avon for helping us do that. With that being said, it's about all the time we have. Once again, I want to thank our guests for being here. I want to thank you, the viewers, for joining us. I'm Chuck Wooden.
And I'm Monique Melanson Hunter.
Good night, and we'll see you next time on A Veterans Corner.